person when you show up and you can come to it, and it's very moving.
Absolutely.
The ones I've been to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I never even knew the memorial was there. Probably the first, when was it built? On Mary.
It's about 20 years old, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was after I came to Charleston a lot, my first career reasons to come here. But yeah, I think the first 5 years that our daughter lived downtown, I never knew it existed. So, but I take everything. It's just
at the intersection of Calhoun in Meeting Street,
right.
Facing south. To the right-hand side, you have the Holocaust Memorial. To the left-hand side, you have the memorial to the Mother Emanuel victims, and it's sort of anytime you cross that intersection, you can't help but think about those two memorials and those events that occurred. And it's just, to me, it's always just a good reminder of man's inhumanity.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow,
Never forget.
Well, that's the challenge, Carol. It's just that we should never forget. That's our challenge.
Very true.
You're on yet?
Yes, Councilmember, we are here.
All right, good, thank you. Let's call the meeting to order, and Councilman Shahid, if you bring a few words, please.
Thank you. Almighty Father, we ask for your blessings on this beautiful day in Charleston, South Carolina. We ask that you bless each and every one of us, your public servants, that you keep in mind those folks who are always on the front lines. And we are mindful, Almighty God, of the strife in our country, as we are reminded of another shooting of a young man involving police officers. Help us heal from that tragedy. Help us move forward from that tragedy. Keep us as your servants to you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Councilman. Approval of the minutes of February 2nd and March 8th.
So moved.
March 22nd being deferred. Probably moved. Is there a second out there?
Second.
Probably moved second. Any questions on those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, good. We're down to item E, acceptance and dedication of rights of way.
I'll move for approval.
Mr. O'Brien, any explanations?
Just very quickly, Mr. Chairman, this is another letter to DOT saying the city will accept maintenance responsibility for a granite curb, a carriage stamper, and a handicap ramp. This is Fire Station 8 on Hugie Street. So it's just the renovations that are going on there.
Okay. There's a second to Councilman Griffin's motion.
Second.
Probably moving second. Any more discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. O'Brien, anything of note unusual on any of these temporary encroachments?
No, sir. We have one right angle sign, some irrigation, and a couple of fences, but nothing is out of the ordinary.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilman Griffin?
Yes, sir. We probably need to, let the record reflect what date, because it says March XX.
Yes, sir. Miss Moore was out last week and she forgot to send the update. That was a draft. The actual date will be April 9th is when I met with staff and approved those. So that will, I'll get that copy to Bethany and the clerk's office in Belfast.
Perfect. Let the record reflect that the appropriate date is April the 9th, 2021 for these temporary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Griffin.
All right, thank you both. Item G, Public Service Department update. Daniel,
yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we're very happy to announce that we're putting forward to the review for your committee and then also approval by City Council tomorrow night the design contract for the Beresford Creek Bridge replacement on Daniel Island. Keith Frazier in our office here in engineering has been working very hard with JMT, who's got a lot of experience in the city and was the firm that won the award. And we've been working very hard to get that in motion, and we will put that forth and start the design process and hopefully get through that and get construction underway as soon as possible.
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Probably moving second. Any more discussion? Councilman Griffin?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. This is full circle. I actually served on this selection committee. It was one of the first committees I served on after being elected to city council, and we took it very, very seriously. And it's not a very big bridge, but it has a lot of traffic that goes through it. And one thing that I'm really excited about, I know all of us are, is this was something that Councilmember Gary White really championed to get this bridge done and replaced for many, many years. And while he's no longer on council, I know he'll be very proud to see us getting this bridge finished. And it's a major thoroughfare for a lot of traffic on Daniel Island. So it's going to be a great project. So looking forward to it. And I believe it's going to also, if I remember correctly, create some really good transportation options for people that want to bike and walk. It's going to fix a lot of those right of ways there and create new sidewalks. And it's going to really enhance that. That bridge has been in disrepair for many, many years. And this is going to be a big step in the right direction for our great constituents out there on Daniel Island.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I wanted y'all to know that we are the proud owners of 12 different bridges in our city. And I'm not sure how we came by to own these things, but this is an example that frankly, long-term, it's a responsibility of ours, but it's also a liability when they need to be replaced and repaired. I want to comment and thank Mr. O'Brien and his team. They've now organized good records about the bridges we own. They're making sure that we have regular inspections made of those bridges in conjunction with the DOT so that we keep a better handle on when replacements are needed. But the downside of all this, I just want to share with my colleagues here, is that we have no dedicated funding source to replace and build bridges. And so we're reliant on either general funds or grant monies until such time as state legislature allows us some mechanism by which we can help fund improvements to our roadways for paving, for bridges, and so forth. So it's just a little bit of reality, bite of reality here that we need to think about for our future. Thanks.
Mhm.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add on what the mayor said to that. As last week, I was in some deep conversations with the DOT district office, and the gentleman up there, Kevin Mitchell, was very helpful. And I told the mayor, and we now in our inventory, we have a record of our last inspections, which DOT has done for us, and also the record of the next scheduled inspections. But more importantly, DOT is taking what I think is a more global look on potentially helping with funding for replacement and repairs of these bridges. They started earlier this spring. We had a general meeting with some members of DOT and Keith Benjamin's staff and some stuff. So we're looking at hopefully working as a joint effort, as the mayor said, because there's really no money put aside for this. And also, I've been working with Rick Giroux, and I've got Sherry Ann. We're looking as the president's infrastructure bill comes to fruition to see what potential is there for funding for us to get ready to do these things. But it's very important. The mayor said, for a city our size, 12 bridges, some of them aren't very big. Some of them, like the Magnolia Bridge, are pretty substantial. So we need to make sure that we maintain these. They don't get in a state of disrepair. Then we have the money to repair them as we go along.
Let me. I'm holding up my hand, and
We call on you a cell count.
Let me ask a question. Is any way we can look into how we came in ownership of this? Because I have a question. I saw Amy's not on the meeting, but Matt Froelich is on the call. Hypothetically, could we have used this 1.7 million out of the 2018 general reserve to go towards our $3.2 million deficit for 21? Mr. Froelich?
Yes, sir. One thing I can tell you, Mr. Waring, a lot of these bridges, several of them on Daniel Island, obviously with the creeks on Daniel Island, are there to connect portions of Daniel Island islands over there and little peninsulas that make them developable, and they're part of the roadway actually infrastructure over there. The Magnolia Bridge was the same way. As the Magnolia project is starting to get really moving in the right direction. That'll be a main thoroughfare to that activity also. So a lot of them are just connecting of roads, and with us being here in the low country with our marshes and swamps and rivers and creeks, it's just a matter of providing access to these areas.
Yeah, I understand that, but I wonder, how do we prevent that from happening again? In other words, if we annex a piece of property and begin developing another piece of property and we need a bridge over the creek, why don't we apply to the highway department for that, or even the county for that, or some combination thereof? Again, they're the one getting the gas tax and stuff, not us. So, Mr. Froelich, I'm just curious, if we didn't have this expense, could we have used the 1.7 million that's coming out of the 2018 General Reserve Fund? Could we have accessed that for the 3.2 deficit that we raised 2 mills to generate to offset that millage increase?
Councilor Waring, I'm on here. This is
Oh,
Amy.
okay, I'm sorry.
We could have
Yeah.
taken that money, yes, towards, if we needed to use that towards our deficit, we could have taken it out of there and put it to unassigned.
You're saying that we could have?
We could, we could take that general fund reserve that we have projects reserved with, we could take any project away and put it back in if we wanted to. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's what I was asking, in particular, this specific one, but thank you.
We could, but $1.7 million for a bridge that we need to repair, that wouldn't have been one that we would have selected to.
No, I understand. I just want to know that those dollars were eligible potentially.
They are, because they're just general fund. That's just general fund money. It's not restricted to anything other than what we restricted to.
All right, thank you, Ms. Morton. Councilman Appel and then Shea.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then just following up on your logic there, would there be any problem with just pushing this out a year, just as we're continuing to get more information on how the federal law is going to be interpreted? Is this an exigent situation here?
I understand it is, but I'll let Mr. O'Brien respond.
I'm sorry, Councilman Appel, I had another call coming. I was telling him I was on a meeting. Could you repeat that, please, sir?
Yeah, I was just wondering if this was a project that we could maybe look at in another 6-12 months or so to free up some flexibility as we're sort of figuring out what the federal relief legislation has to say about the use of funds and things of that nature. I'm just trying to understand, following up on Councilman Waring's point, as to whether or not this might be something that we may want to look at pushing off a little bit.
This is the design contract, which is going to take probably 6 to 8 months. I would, if we would do that, the bridge, we did have to put a plate on there because there was some damage to the substructure, and it's passable now, but we have a weight limit on it. And I would have some concern if we didn't proceed at least ahead with the design of the project, maybe the construction, but it would put us back 8 months to possibly a year if we were to wait to start the design and then worry about the information as far as.
You silence yourself, Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah, you muted.
You muted yourself.
I think he took a phone call,
Okay.
but I'll just say, add to that, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
The remarks I've heard ever since the inspections were done on this bridge were of the nature that, which led to us putting the plate on it to support it and reducing the weight. It really should be replaced with all reasonableness of moving forward.
And I apologize. Mr. Alltop's having trouble getting on. He's got the next presentation. He's panicking, so I'm trying to tell him to hold on for a second till I finish with y'all. But the mayor's right. We really need to proceed with this, I think, and then and move forward, because it could put us back, and that access to Daniel Island over there, if we were to have that bridge go out, could be a pretty major concern to the citizens of Daniel Island.
Understood, but as we go forward with this design phase, I think we will today. Is this something we can, in particular, depending on how this infrastructure bill unfolds, put a shovel-ready project, this being pretty much shovel-ready to move forward with a transportation infrastructure request? I think this is something we should at least consider anyway.
I think when the time comes, and I think between Amy and Matt, and I know that Rick Drew and myself and Sherry Ann, we're looking at any and all funding, even through the state. We've actually approached Berkeley County. Keith might know a little bit more about the state, might want to weigh in there, but I think the state's taking more of a position that any roadways, whether they're city or state maintained or not, that they need to take some responsibility for. And I think that's something that as we get ready for the construction of that, we can move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Councilman Shahid, you had a question.
I did, and so you know how I feel about the state dumping things on our lap. Is the road that this bridge connects over Bradford Creek, is this a state road or a city maintained road? Mr. Benjamin, can you know the answer to that?
Part of the road, St. Thomas Road, is state, and the portion where the bridge is city.
Yes, sir.
It's a combination.
It's a combination of city and state?
Yes, sir.
And how about those other 11 bridges? Are they also in that same kind of category?
I'd have to go back and check each one individually. Some on Johns Island and a couple of them on Daniel Island I know are city streets. And but I'll send you. I can send you a report, Mr. Shea. We have the actual inventory, and I'll check whether they're actually city or state. I think most of the ones on our list are city maintained roads.
I just, these are expensive projects. This is $1.7 million, and this is a short bridge. And I just don't like us getting stuck with state's responsibility on some of these things. And if there's a way to get their involvement in this thing, Mr. Chairman, I think that's worthwhile for the citizens of Charleston.
I agree 100%. Mr. Bryan, maybe if you can send some information out.
Yes, sir. I'll send our bridge inventory with some added information showing the roads they're on and whether they're state or city maintained, and the rest of the information is pretty much in there for you guys to be able to check out.
Good deal. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman Griffin.
may I just make one more point?
Sure.
And just to piggyback off of you and what Councilmember Appel said about this funding, I think today we're only appropriating about 400 and something thousand and change of the 1.7. And we're saying that it's going to take 6 to 8 months for engineering, which really pushes us into the next fiscal year. So was that entire 1.7 appropriated for this fiscal year, or so, does that free up maybe 1.3 million or so that we could maybe apply for this year for something else? Or can you tell us?
Can you address that question?
Councilmember Griffin, it's actually general fund reserve, so it's not a budgeted expense in the general fund. But even if we didn't spend that money, we would reserve it to the following year, so we wouldn't have to rebudget it.
Okay, but I'm sure that with these lists of projects, like you were talking about, of how we're allocating our general fund reserve, with this, something that we expected the entire expense to go into this year, or we're just saying the lifetime of this particular bridge project, we're going to have that allocation there to cover it?
It's just for to fix the bridge. I mean, the
Okay.
maintenance part of that for future years, maintaining the bridge would go into the general fund as an expense.
Well, my thought is maybe since we've got some time and we're doing the engineering now, maybe in the meantime, we reach back out to DOT and see if they can help us with some of the costs on the actual building of the bridge. The engineering is only a very small portion compared to the additional 1.3. If it's a shared road, maybe we can all put our heads together and see if they'll help us out a little bit with some of these bridges, especially, if we can't take on the entire cost of a road that's a shared responsibility. I know all of us have great relationship with DOT. Maybe we can get them to maybe match us or at least offer something.
Councilmember Griffin, I will say that I think those preliminary discussions that started at the district maintenance office level, and Keith may know more about higher up through Columbia, but I think we've started those discussions to maybe get them to assist.
Thank you.
All right, the second time Mr. Benjamin has been referenced. I'm not going to wait for a third time. Mr. Benjamin, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One specific to the project overall. I agree with the mayor that moving forward with the project as soon as possible is crucial. the very moment that there's a shutdown on Don Hope or otherwise, all that truck traffic takes that way to get through Daniel Island, neighborhood streets, to get back onto 526. It's extremely dangerous. The worst of the worst can happen. So the opportunity to address that as quickly as possible, I think we can't ignore that, right?
But what about the portion of reaching out to other allies potentially? Contributing to
I think that's something to explore, but I think we have to do that while at the same time recognizing how much infrastructure we currently have in the city that that is ripe for having to be maintained at some point. If you remember a couple of years ago, we approached you all because the DOT was discussing, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback, but was discussing a buyback program where they would bring certain roads up to a state of good repair at a certain number with a 40-year buyout and otherwise. We haven't heard updates back from SCDOT in Columbia about that, but I think it all does need to be explored in significant ways, especially because we have a lot of, as you all just voted on, we're taking on infrastructure literally monthly. And there's infrastructure that maybe a couple of years ago we weren't as concerned about because it was newer, that we're going to have to navigate and figure out whether that's repaving, whether that's bridge repair, or whether that's other things. Like we just, thankfully, because of the help of BFRC, we're able to do new signalization at Island Park and Fairchild. That was not state money. That was leveraged city funds from Governor's Park that went into making that intersection happen. So it's just, I think, separate conversation, but we got to have our dialogue about the fact that we are constantly taking on new infrastructure without a means to manage it financially.
Well, Mr. Benjamin, why don't we set a time? We've heard that conversation before amongst ourselves. Why don't we have a time, set a time to have that hard conversation, just that on taking on, because Councilman Shea has been right about that for about 5 years now, taking on all these state projects, and we don't have any money, to do it, frankly, when they come up to be repaired. But maybe we look at getting the time to have that conversation on the things that need another approach than what we have right now for maintenance.
Understood.
Okay. I need a motion on this one, ladies and gentlemen.
We had one. I made it, and I think somebody seconded it.
Okay. We're all in on the discussion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. A briefing on the grant submittal on the electric garbage truck. Is this Mr. O'Brien or Mr. Altop?
Mr. Alltop's going to do that for us.
All right, Mr. Altop.
Yes, I have a slideshow. I don't know if I can share my screen or not here. Can you see it?
Sure can, yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. For some reason it's not playing. All right. So there's a quick video here. It's got about a minute 30 here. Let you guys go ahead and watch it. It shows you a lot of what the truck is, and then there's some other facts and figures that we can go over here in just a second. Well, it's not playing. There it goes.
Looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. All right, so Tom wanted me to go over some things real quick. So right now our diesel trucks are costing us about $290,000 per truck. The electric trucks are quite more expensive and usually run about $625,000 for the rear load like we're purchasing. We submitted the grant application for $521,000, which comes with a 12-year warranty and is about 45% of the purchase price of the trucks. The remaining amount of $754,000 would be budgeted for the 2020 budget. Currently, we're paying about $58,000 per truck over an 8-year period, and about $116,000 for the 2 trucks that we'd be replacing over an 8-year period. These electric trucks would reduce that energy costs. Well, that was fuel, excuse me. These trucks would reduce that cost to around $11,000 or $23,000 for the both of them, and that's the pretty much the price of the electricity to run it. And then we'd see a 60% reduction in maintenance costs. Right now, we're averaging about $110,000 a truck over an 8-year period. So that's about $221,000 for 2 trucks over that same period. The reduction would put it down to about $44,000 per truck over an 8-year period compared to the 110. So you're looking at about a $88,000 difference, 88,000 compared to 221 over the 8-year period. So you're going to save money there. Charging station would be able to charge both trucks at the same time. It'd take about 8 hours or less to charge it, and the trucks would run around 10 hours, about 120 miles. They would be used on the peninsula. And they're zero emission, no noise pollution, and no hydraulics. So there wouldn't be any hydraulic leaks, less environmental impact, staining on the roads, etc. For if we do have an oil leak or hydraulic leak now. These trucks have zero fluid in it other than windshield wiper fluid, and have radiator fluids in them. That's just to cool the batteries. That's it. There's no other fluid in the truck at all. But those are some of the key features of this that Tom wanted me to bring to you guys and share. Got any questions?
How much is the charging station going to cost?
So the charging station is all included in that. It's part of the 700. I want to say it was 60 some thousand, but it was in. Go ahead.
It's a one-time cost?
It's a one-time cost, and it can be moved if we were to move facilities. Any other questions?
So you did a good job, Mr. Halltop. Is this, so we need to vote on Councilman Shade?
So, Matt, what was the lifespan of these trucks?
So these trucks, about 12 years. It'll come with a 12-year warranty. So if anything happens to the batteries or anything, it will be replaced under warranty. So, I mean, 12 years plus is definitely not out of the question compared to our replacement program right now is at 8. So we're going to be extending that program for about 4 years.
So it's a 4-year longer lifespan, plus all those other benefits that you brought up. And you said that we would use these on the peninsula first?
Yes. So we would, we're get 2 of the rear loads this, to replace what we're going to be replacing in 2022. And they would be used on the peninsula. And then we would look into the ASLs down the road, because we just bought those and there's nothing coming open for replacement on those.
Do you envision at some point, if we got some of these trucks for West Ashley, of having these trucks being located at a charger station, such as I'm just gonna make this up, like a fire station, and storing them at a fire station West Ashley to be recharged overnight to do their runs? Is that something that's even feasible to be thinking about?
Yeah, that's something that's feasible for sure. Right now, they're going to get about 120 miles, and that's going to increase as the technology. I mean, it's still a new technology, so as the technology continues to develop, the range on these vehicles are just going to improve. and get better. So, you know, in a couple years, you know, we may be getting 240 miles out of them instead of 120.
Yeah, I was watching some news program that did a special on electronic vehicles, and the competition is so intense right now on these things that it's driving the technology to be vastly improved. I hate to say every day, but that's an exaggeration. But certainly, where we were 5 years ago on electronic vehicles and where we're going to go, it's just moving at a very rapid pace. And I think what the major was it GM is planning on 2035 a full fleet of electronic vehicles. So it'd be wonderful to obtain these things. A process in the city of Charleston. I mean, just the noise level reduction would be a huge step for livability in our communities.
Yep. Especially downtown on the peninsula when these trucks start, you know, a little bit early. You know, it might be good to put one of these on commercial. So that way, when the truck's out there in the morning, you know, when we go into these neighborhoods, we're not waking people up.
Thanks, Matt.
Councilman Griffin.
Yes, sir. I think that this approach that we're taking, going through a grant program, because it is a good first step, because as you probably gotten calls like I have, people see that price tag and how much more expensive this particular truck is, and that throws them back. But if we can get the grant and we can cut the price in half, and then you look at the amount of money that you're going to save over the life of the truck, we're actually going to save our taxpayers money, which is great. But, you know, everybody looks at that big number in the beginning and it, you know, scares them, you know, especially with the kind of financial shape that we have to have tough decisions and have tough talks every single meeting. But, you know, I think this is a great approach, because if we can get this grant, it makes it a lot more reasonably priced. And then it gives, you know, kind of two trucks for us to go out there and show our people, you know, how great they're going to be. But, you know, unfortunately, you know, because electric is more expensive, there's a lot of people that are just skeptical at the high prices. So I love the approach that we're taking. I think this is a smart way to do it. And we're going to let these trucks kind of speak for themselves, or, you know, they're going to be so quiet, you're not even going to know they're coming down the street. But the lack of noise will speak for themselves.
But you bring an interesting point, Councilman Griffin. Maybe we need to have a press release on this, Mr. Mayor, so we can get the full story out, as opposed to, because I saw that story you saw, Councilman Griffin, that didn't speak to the grant, I think. I think when one does come, hopefully we put our message out on this. I think it'd be good. Any other questions? Mr. Mayor.
So two questions. One first, is it a little smaller than our existing trucks, which would be good in tight spaces, Matt?
So it's the same size we have now.
It is? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So my second question is, how, if I forget to put my can out at night, how am I going to know to run out and roll my can out to the street in the morning if I don't hear the truck a block away like I do now?
Yep. So they're not 100% quiet. They do have a speaker that projects noise out the front. So if people are walking, they don't walk out in front of it, type of thing. But they are significantly less noisy than what we have.
All right, thanks.
Mr. O'Brien.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like for Matt, would you kind of tell them what the schedule is as far as the application of the grant, when we might hear, and the timing for the purchase?
So we should hear sometime in July, whether we get approved or not. And then we would look forward to putting that in the budget for 2022. I've been working closely with Amy and Andrew and her group, Sherry Ann, to get that in there. And then they would be purchased next year, I guess, beginning January or something of next year. It takes about 3 to 6 months to put one of these vehicles together at this time. So we would probably take delivery of it, you know, July, September of next year.
Is this something that's already been submitted, is about to be submitted on?
So the grant has been submitted. It was submitted about a month ago. So they, through the American Lung Association, is doing the grant. So It's all been submitted and we're just waiting to hear now. We should hear in July.
It's not been submitted through the city, it's through American Lung Association?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep,
okay.
the city, we partnered with them. They're doing a bunch of things around the area. So we partnered with them and to make our case a little better. So it gives us a better shot of getting this grant.
Even though it's already been submitted, I still think we ought to put a motion on it. We sure we had the party discussion on it and prove. Even though it's post, I still think we should put a motion on it.
Is a motion
approval.
for, to proceed with the grant application?
Well, or even, we've approved grants after they've been submitted before.
Yeah, but if that's your intent, I would make that motion.
I believe we voted on this at Ways and Means recently, didn't we?
We did? Oh, if we did, then forget it then.
Yeah, last meeting or the one before that.
Okay.
I've got one question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilman Griffin.
Just a general trash question as we talk about trash. How much longer, Matt, do you know the lifespan of the Bees Ferry dump? Is it?
So they won't give you a straight up answer. I've had some conversations over the weekend with some outside parties. That landfill is probably going to be privatized fairly shortly. They are working on getting that together. And they're going to put that out for bid pretty quickly, I think, from what I'm hearing. And they're going to privatize that and county's going to be out of the landfill business.
Yeah, I figured we were getting close to that.
Yeah.
I think it's 30 years, isn't it?
Yeah, it's getting close. They had a new cell built, but I don't think they're going to use it.
Councilman Griffin, also, I recall after Hugo, the number they used, we lost 15 to 19 years off the life of that landfill at that time. So that was pretty incredible.
All right. I see Council Lady Jackson is on the call. Just in case you had any input on this, Council Lady Jackson.
Thanks. I'm all for it. We're not ready to bring to the Public Works Committee the idea that we've been trying to jumpstart here on James Island to consolidate trash routes, collection routes with James Island PSD. So mum's the word on that. But I think we're going to make really good progress on that this month and hopefully bring it to our your last meeting in April.
Okay,
And I think, having this kind of, innovation just really encourages everybody that we're on the right track to do the best we can for the environment and all the right climate action plan reasons.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's go on to item H1, Stormwater Manual Task Force update. Is that Mr. Fountain?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So we do have on the agenda just a brief update for the committee. That we are meeting with the task force to discuss the stormwater manual primarily this Thursday at 3 p.m. And that's bringing kind of the original band back together, as they say, from the original stormwater task force. Councilman Shade being a member and Councilman Jackson as well on the on the task force. We will be discussing implementation experiences from the development community and the new manual, as well as the citizenry that are represented on the committee, or on the task force rather. We're also going to discuss a few other topics while we have the group together for the manual. We are going to bring up the recommendations that Councilman Griffin had for fill restrictions and see what some input is from the task force, both on the idea of potentially removing an option to do slab on grade foundations in the floodplain, as well as seeing if there are any other approaches that people think might be a strong solution. It's a pretty diverse task force, so it's a good place to have that discussion. We're also going to go over one of the departmental recommendations, the staff recommendations of looking at small lot grading standards. So when you're building like an individual single family house, not a tract built subdivision, but an individual home, or if you're building a very small commercial site, right now we really have very minimal restrictions on those sites from how your grading looks. And we have had a number of complaints even since the new manual where people have come and basically filled in their backyards to such an extent they really impact neighborhood drainage. The state just kind of went the other way in the new state regulation. They actually have basically exempted stormwater regulation on anything up to an acre in size. They actually went larger with their statewide exemptions from stormwater regulation, where we're kind of looking to try to bring that number smaller. Again, different priorities, but we do want to make it something that's relatively simple and straightforward and doesn't involve like a huge amount of engineering for building like one individual single family home, for instance, where you're making that really challenging. So that's something we want to discuss with the task force. And then the last one is that update to the state, and it's called the construction general permit for the state, but basically it's the large scale permit that sets minimum standards everyone has to comply with in the state. So we need to make sure that our manual is also in compliance with those minimum standards. I think we're going to see very minimal changes based on that, as our manual tends to be much more stringent than the state, but just as a point of discussion with the group and seeing if there's any comments from the group on what they think about the state changes as well. We'll take those, take the minutes, kind of the results from that meeting, and come back to this committee and brief you all on what we hear from that group and what our plans are moving forward at that point.
Okay. All right, any questions of Mr. Fountain? We got see Councilman Shade.
I just want to thank Matt while I'm out here. He and I met on Thursday with several constituents on some projects we've been working on. Matt, thank you for the wonderful presentation you did, and you made a lot of people happy. Some of them not so happy, but thanks for coming out there on Thursday. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I couldn't see you there. Councilman Griffin.
Yes, sir. Are we going to be scheduling a Church Creek task force here shortly?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I respond to that one.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Councilor Griffin, you're right. April is sort of our roughly 3-month period from the first test, the Stormwater Authority meeting. So we do need to get another one of those scheduled. I've been talking with Russell Huggins over at CWS to try to get a group set up and scheduled to come back out and do that as well. So you're right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Seeing no other input, Mr. Fountain, could you touch on King and Hughie update?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is just an update for the committee on this project, and that it's going to be a relatively high visibility project in the area. We're kind of right at the intersection of two of the major streets in the peninsula, the cross street of Hughie and obviously the north-south highway for King Street. We did want to update you that we're looking for a notice to proceed date now of next Monday, the April 19th. So that'll be the date where the contractor's contract time officially starts running on the project. We'll look to see them mobilizing for traffic control and impact shortly thereafter. We've basically been working recently with the contractor Gulfstream, our engineer JMT, CWS, and DOT, as well as the city traffic and transportation, to modify the traffic control plan for that project. So we think we have a really good approach at this point that will minimize disruption, but there's no way to eliminate disruption on an intersection like that. So we are basically, what we've done is we've set it up to have the only lane closures and road closures, because we'll involve both of those since we're working in the middle of the intersection. They will not start until 7:30 p.m. So after afternoon rush hour, and then they will continue until 6 a.m. and the road will have to be fully reopened at 6 a.m. each day. So it's going to be full night operations for lane closures and road closures on the project. And we did this basically in coordination with the local schools, churches, and DOT, trying to figure out what is the best way to minimize the actual like day-to-day impacts on traffic flow and then the operation of those kind of important institutions in the area. So we've coordinated that plan with the schools, with the churches, with the city, with DOT, and we're actually in the process of handing out over 400 flyers to the local residents to make sure they're aware of the traffic shift. But it will be about 4 months. We'll be moving through 4 phases of traffic. I have the flyer. If anyone wants to look at it, I can pull it up on my shared screen. It basically just shows the detour routes.
Can you send it to us?
Yeah, I can also email it out to you all. That's a great idea. And I've coordinated with Councilman Saccharin and Mitchell on it already, so they're up to speed on the disruptions. We think it's going to be relatively minor because of the evening traffic. Will be certainly less traffic coming through those side streets, but it's not zero. But it's an important project, and we just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that if you have any concerns or complaints, The flyer includes the project manager on the project and contact information for Mr. Joe Swaim, so we can try to address any of those issues. But if you have any, please certainly send them on to us as well, and we'll try to make sure we're doing everything we can to limit disruption for people.
Okay. And how long you think that'll be, Mr.? How long that disruption will approximately?
Yeah, so we're part of the advantage of doing it this way. The original contract had had a combination of daytime and nighttime work on different sections of different streets because of UG and King being under different rules. That was originally expected to take at least 6 months because you had to basically be opening and closing things so quickly and working only in a single lane rather than being able to close a section of the street. The revised plan, this plan, we think we can do in 4 months. That's the plan, assuming weather goes well and assuming we don't have any unexpected surprises, which is always dangerous on a major capital project. But we're looking to be done in September.
Okay, thank you. Discussion on item 3 on the discussion on drainage easement at Lochmore Terrace. Mr. Griffin.
I've got Mr. Hassel here with me. He's come to my office for today. He's got a short PowerPoint he'd like to share just to give y'all some pictures of the timeline over these last 11 years, as long as the committee will indulge him, if that's all right.
Well, let's give that about 3 minutes or so. Can he do that in about 3 minutes?
Certainly.
Yes, sir.
Good deal. All right.
We're going to share his screen on my screen here.
Okay, good.
See how to do that real quick.
First, let me say hello to Mr. Hassel.
He is. He's coming right here next to me. Can everybody see that screen?
I can, yes.
Okay, click twice, click on slideshow,
I got it right here.
and then go to,
Right here. All you do is hit this little button right here to go next. Without further ado, Mr. John Hassel.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hassel. Appreciate you taking your time coming in to show us your problem.
Yes, sir, and I enjoyed meeting you last month over at Chatham Moss.
Right.
You had an issue. We bought our house in Lochmore Terrace. We moved out to Chatham Moss, little house right there, a little plain, simple, modern little house. We moved out there about to December, I believe, 2009. And this is, I don't have a pointer here, but this is the neighborhood in the street. My home, here's Lochmore Terrace. I can't see the pointer, but it runs down to the golf course, a short street there. And there is an easement, 10-foot easement on the rear side of each of the property lines for stormwater, overhead and underground electric, gas, all that type of thing, telephone. We moved out there in December of 2009, and shortly thereafter, we got some nice heavy rains. And this is my backyard after that rain in February 1st of 2010. That fence is at the rear of my property. The property behind me, you see part of his lot is high and dry. His lot drains down to the supposed easement and then partially floods my yard. So that was looking to the rear lot line, which includes the drainage easement. Another pic of my rear yard when we moved in, little shed we had just taken out, so gotten rid of some plywood, but that's the yard after a rainstorm.
Okay.
Okay, so I called the seller. He told me that the neighbor next door, her husband or ex-husband, had put a garden shed in his yard, put a bunch of construction sand in there, and that blocked the easement. And he just ran a bilge pump to pump the water out of the rear yard. And not willing to agree with that, I went down to the city engineering office. It was still at the school board building and met with Mr. Del Porto. He came out to the yard, looked at it, and said that the easement, it wasn't anything he could do because the former owner of my property had put the shed in the easement, and the next door neighbor's shed was in the easement. I told him I'd get mine, I'd tear mine down and remove it. He wanted me to get the neighbor to remove her shed. He didn't want to mess with the divorcee lady next door. I told him that wasn't my job and that just wasn't acceptable, and this started to die. Okay, so here's my shed and the neighbor's shed. I tore mine down. A few years later, the neighbor removed her shed, maybe 6 years later. And at that point, I decided, okay, maybe I can start this up again. But in the meantime, my solution has been to run a 500 gallon per hour bilge pump with 200 feet of hose and a battery that I replace every 24 hours. And it takes 48 hours sometimes to pump the water out of the yard. I admit it doesn't pump 500 gallons an hour with 200 feet of hose. but it's probably, I've calculated probably between sometimes 700 to 1,000 gallons after a rainstorm hitting my yard and the yard behind me. So
And you pump it to the street, Mr.
I just pump it straight out to the street
Yes,
and
sir. Okay.
let it run over the curb. Yes.
Okay.
So after the neighbor moved her shed a few years later, I took up this crusade again. And I met with Mr. Matt Fountain, I believe he's here today, and Councilman Griffin. They were nice enough to come over and look at the situation. And Mr. Fountain said that he needed to send a surveyor over to actually see where the easement was. And it turns out it wasn't exactly where I thought it was. It was a little bit deeper on the surrounding lots. At some point I was told, I don't remember who, that with the surveyor coming, the fences might be in the way in the side of my yard. So I actually took my fence down so we could try to get a resolution to this. So I put the fence back up. The surveyor came and marked the lot corners, marked the easement. It turned out the easement wasn't in the presumed location, but ran some distance through a little hilly area with some trees on it. And I believe Mr. Fountain said that was just going to be too expensive to fix that, to satisfy a problem with one property owner. The easement should run down to the drainage ditch on the northwest, I guess, side of number 11 on the golf course.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's the drainage easement in my yard, and the fence there, that's the rear neighbor's fence. Actually, that corner of his fence is on the lot line. It should be 10 feet into his yard. That fence is in the easement. And there's my drainage system right now, my bilge pump and my hose.
Okay.
Here's the drainage easement going toward the golf course. You can see the blue flag marking one section of it by this soccer goal. And we thought that all ran down, basically where the soccer goal is, but actually the middle of the easement is up through that stand of trees.
Oh, okay.
Going up right through that way. In any event, there you go. There's my drainage system right now. And like I say, it takes 48 hours to drain my yard. So let's move. We're 11 years later. We talked with the city about properly grade the easement. The city said basically, and I wanted to sod my yard and have the easement, and I was told it was too expensive. One suggestion was that I tie into a French drain that my neighbor had built. I don't want to do that because I don't want to be tied into maintenance cost of her drainage system. That's not my job. My suggestion was that the city abandon the easement. Actually, I think the easement is and has been abandoned for neglect. And I would grade my yard, install a sump pump, and run it underground to the street. But I'm not going to allow my neighbor behind me to drain across my yard. I'm going to put a sheet pile in at the property line, and he can keep his water. I'm not paying to drain that. Anyway, we're kind of at an impasse. And here I am now. This was last month after the rain. Here's my yard, 5.5 inches deep. It took 2 days to drain out with the pump running 24 hours a day. It's been 11 years.
I see. I hear your problem. I hear your
Ask
problem.
for help, and I understand. I mean, listen, y'all got all kind of expenses, and maybe this is minor to y'all in the grand scheme of things, but this is major to me and my wife. I mean, we feel like it's a take-in without compensation. We pay taxes. I pay stormwater fees. I quit paying the stormwater fee on the water bill a few months ago. I wrote on the bill, I'm not paying stormwater fees. I don't get any stormwater drainage. All they did was charge me $10 late fee. So I quit with that. I need help, please. I appreciate you very much letting me come in here and address y'all. But I'm begging for some relief here.
Listen, I appreciate giving the troubles that you've had, presenting it as logically as you had. Thank you so much for that. But let's try to talk about some potential solutions here. Before getting into questions, I'm gonna let Mr. Fountain come on and let us know what he knows. Mr. Fountain, can you tell me a little bit more about this situation from an engineering standpoint?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So I think if we want to cancel the screen share, I can just pull up real quick.
Oh yeah, if you can do that. Thank you, Mr. Hassel. I'm telling you, it's pretty comprehensive what you showed.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Fountain?
In case I ask you a question.
Yeah, and so Mr. Chairman, I think we did go out with Councilman Griffin and we did look at the area. And as Mr. Hassel mentioned, we surveyed and staked in the easement. Basically, we did look that there is a drainage easement on the plats. It certainly appears that the original, for whatever reason, the original developer either did not build the noted drainage swale. Honestly, the homes don't look quite old enough for there to have been that level of tree growth and berm creation. But we looked at saying, okay, here's where the easement is. Here's what we could use to drain out the property. We put that in as a potential small project in last year's small project allocation. Because of the trees, we did talk with some contractors. We think it's probably in excess of $100,000 to remove that level of trees behind the homes because of the adjacency to the homes. And at that point, I think there had been a question of what the likelihood of funding was for that project, as Mr. Hassel mentions, because there's a single homeowner who currently floods. We did survey and speak with a number of the neighbors in the area as well. As Mr. Hassel mentioned, I think he's the only one who kind of expressed that they had any flooding issues. The neighbor did express they installed a French drain system in their own backyard. And that was, I think, where Mr. Hassel was mentioning they'd offered to let him tie into that system if he thought that would be helpful. But I certainly understand his concerns with maintenance of that system moving forward. We did also let Mr. Hassel know he could apply for an encroachment permit to do any work he wanted within the easement because it wasn't currently obviously being used as a drainage conveyance system. And let's see, we did discuss back, Councilman Griff, you might have to remind me, but it's been roughly a year, I think, the potential for abandonment of the easement. And we talked with a number of the surrounding property owners. Most of them sort of showed no strong feelings either way on whether that easement were maintained or abandoned in the area. So I think that's probably where a very brief summary of where we stand on it. If you have any specific questions, I can speak to those as well.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Fountain. Now, obviously, I hear you loud and clear on, almost 100,000 to clear out those big trees to get down there. The French drain, hypothetically, if Mr. Hassel had an easement coming from his back fence to the street, would it make sense for the city to put a French drain in if they had an easement to come from his backyard to the street drainage out front? I mean, manually right now, he's pumping it to the street.
Yes, I believe, and I have to double check, I believe the backyard is lower than the street drainage is, so it wouldn't be able to gravity flow. I think that's why the pump generally is used to move that water up and into the street location. We did look at running a French drain originally back all the way down that easement to the larger drainage system, but that's where, unfortunately, the easy place to run that easement is outside of where the current easement lies. It would be back into people's private properties, which means acquiring more easement, and that's always a challenge from property owners.
So the drainage system out front of his house is a curb and guttering, or is it piped? Underground pipe.
Gutter. I'd have to double check. I think it's curb and gutter in that area.
Listen, we put a man on the moon. We got to find an engineering solution to this. Okay, so I'm convinced there's got to be some sort of engineering solution to this.
So, I mean, there is. You're right. I mean, Councilman Warren. The easy solution from a non-cost consideration approach, right, is cutting down the trees, digging out the stumps, and building a drainage swale that was kind of the original design for the neighborhood on the flats down to that larger ditch. It's just expensive. It's certainly doable. Just like putting a man on the moon, I guess it's very doable. It's just expensive.
Is there?
Have we exhausted all efforts trying to bring it towards the street? I mean, I don't know whether plant some dirt with a swale, and I don't know. I mean, I haven't been to the site, so then I can't speak. And that's my fault because I should have been there before this meeting. If the neighbor has a French drain, they can get to the curb and guttering, but this gentleman can't.
So the neighbor's French drain, I can pull up a screen share really quick, Councilman Green. That might help.
And Mr. Chairman, while Matt's doing that, I just wanted to remind everyone, we had a rec meeting slated to start at 4:30. So
okay.
I think we have some people waiting to sign on.
Started this meeting 30 minutes late, though.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Cook.
So, Mr.
This
Chairman,
is the last item, Ms. Cook. So we'll be done after this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is the easement kind of in question here.
Yes,
This
sir.
is for Hassel's house. Yeah, I think so, on this one here. And I'm going to zoom in one level. So what happens is this is the neighbor, and what he's done is installed a French drain kind of through his grass yard that ties down into the lower elevations here and drains down into this larger drainage system along the golf course.
Oh,
So the water comes this way. And what happens is we're hoping that the easement ran right where that backyard is and half in, half out of that tree line. But the easement's actually, as you can see, it really is way back into the bulk of the tree line. So that's what this gentleman's French drain system is. He just put it in his lawn so we could still have lawn rather than having an open ditch. And it dumps into this kind of, there's a little bit of a swale running through the back of this lawn that then ties into this drainage system down here.
so that neighbor runs their water through another neighbor's backyard?
They do. This neighbor, again, there is a drainage easement back there and there's a little bit more of a swale in that yard. And we talked with this neighbor and they said they didn't have any special drainage problems either, probably because they have the larger golf course drainage system, the system that runs along the golf course behind their homes. They don't have the same level of, I think, Mr. Hassel kind of has the unfortunate situation here where there's a combination of an electric utility box and some tree roots and kind of the natural topography and his neighbor coming in that kind of traps the water in his backyard is the low point, kind of a localized low point.
Well, let me ask this before you leave that. You see the little blue dot and the neighbor?
Yes, yeah, right here.
Okay, go up to the line above that. That's right. Is there any way to go from there to, what's that, Stone? What's the name of that street, that cul-de-sac right there?
The noon here? Oh, you're saying over to this way?
That's right. In other words, is there any way to get maybe an easement from his backyard out to this cul-de-sac?
So in order to do that, you have to acquire easement from, this house is so close to the property line, probably this property owner. You have to come through here, likely go back here and trench this and build this deeper than it currently is to try to bring the water back that way. It's probably more expensive than taking the trees down and going
Really? Okay.
this way, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, $100,000 sounds like a lot of money, but unfortunately in the civil engineering world, that's a relatively small amount of money.
Okay. But my point is we can't shrug our shoulders in other words. Things gotta get fixed.
No, I mean, there absolutely is an approach. It's just cost, right? I mean, it gets back to like all drainage problems. If we had all the money in the world, we'd fix all the problems in the world. And I'm happy to fix any of the problems that council chooses to allocate us money for, but we have $1 million a year right now with that small project allocation.
Right. Does it make any sense to acquire easement behind the neighbor yard that does have the French drain? Apparently, they didn't cut trees down, so they took it outside that easement. Is there any way we could kind of make that an official easement as opposed to cutting the trees down and then access the swale that way?
So in order to do that, you'd either need to get this property owner to agree to sell you easement through his backyard or condemn it. He certainly offered, as we mentioned, to let Mr. Hassel just tie into his system without an easement, which would be kind of the most straightforward approach from the city side on that, though I understand Mr. Hassel's concern of having his system tie into someone else's private system.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, Councilman Shades had quite a bit of experience, and Councilman Appel with us lately, of trying to get drainage easement from property owners to take someone else's water. It's not a real straightforward process.
Okay. Well, let me do. I saw Councilmember Appel hand up. I see you, Mr. Hassel, but let me get to some Councilmember Appel and then Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, this is giving me some flashbacks of what we're dealing with in the Crescent and all over my district. So I know this is not a lot of consolation, but this is something that we see a lot. I'm wondering what the cost would be for maintenance to the French drain system over 10 years, 20 years, et cetera. I'd be shocked if it's anywhere near $100,000. I mean, maybe there's an opportunity here for some sort of a three-party agreement between, the property owners and the city that maybe we can fork over, some more limited funds to help maintain the French drainage system in lieu of this $100,000 project for one property owner. Just a thought.
I think it's good to expand on that. How would something like that work, Councilman Appel? I know you're thinking out loud right now, but would it be some sort of maintenance agreement that the city would get the approval from joining landowners to keep that French drain operative with their permission?
Yeah, and subject to Mr. McQueenie, telling me if this is even something that's feasible. I mean, obviously, we can't spend public money on private property, but to the extent there's a nexus here to help drainage in an easement that the city already has, perhaps there's a way we can, maybe set aside some funding for this effort in some way. As Matt said, from an engineering standpoint, you can do a whole lot with money. From a legal standpoint, I know you can do a whole lot so long as everybody consents. But I just want to throw that out there as a potential solution here.
I think it's a good thought. Councilman Shea, you had your hand up.
I did, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. It's Mr. Heflin?
Mr. Hassel. Mr. Hassel.
And I just want to tell you that as Councilmember Appel just was referencing, I represent District 9, which includes the area over by Charlestown Landing, Lochmore Terrace, and Charlestown Estates, over off Old Town Road in San Wittenberg. And your problem is reminiscent of several issues I've been dealing with for the past several years with the assistance of Mr. Fountain. So it is a serious problem that you're facing, but several of my constituents are experiencing the same kind of issues. And what you talk about with easements being lost or people putting obstructions over their easements is unfortunately a common thing that's happened in West Ashley, in particular in these old neighborhoods. So I want you to know that those of us who live in West Ashley who represent these older neighborhoods are experiencing the same problem. And we're here to help you in any way that we can with this. Of course, we have to look to Mr. Fountain for suggestions. Something that Mr. Councilmember Appel just brought up is something we would consider as well. I don't want you leaving this meeting not thinking that we're not listening to you or this is not a major concern for all of us on City Council. Because addressing these issues are important to your home. This is where you live, and we will support anything that we can to help address that problem for you. Okay.
I appreciate it very much. The only thing I wanted to interject a minute ago was my neighbor's storm drain system that her ex-husband put in is an underground pipe. I doubt if it's 3 inches in diameter with 2 little drop inlets. And about every time it rains, she's out there in the rain cleaning the straw and the leaves off of the drop inlets.
Mm-hmm.
Much of a drainage system.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have seen that as well. So what you telling us is not new news, but it's something that I think we'll continue to work with our stormwater department to find a solution for you one way or another.
I certainly appreciate it, sir.
Mr. Fountain, picking up on Mr. May, I'll recognize you in a second. Mr. Fountain, I saw what looks like a transformer in the backyard. I'm wondering whether is there a utility easement there that maybe we can partner with that's outside our drainage system, but if they have a utility easement there, maybe we can, I don't know how that runs. I don't know if we've looked into that or not.
That is supposed to be in the same drainage easement. It's slightly outside of it, but the easement was for drainage and utilities.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Fountain, I mean, Mr. Mayor.
So, and hello, Mr. Hassel, how you doing? Good to see you.
Sir, good to see you.
Yeah. Matt, so are you telling me the original intent of this easement would have been that there be a sizable ditch, if you will, free and clear that would have run from behind Mr. Hassel's house down to that ditch feature that runs along the golf course?
So the original plat's listed as a swale easement. A swale generally being a very gentle, low ditch area.
Right.
So that's certainly what it seems like the intent was to build a kind of, and you see that in many areas in Chatham Moss, kind of a low rear yard, gentle ditch that would have drained back to that larger easement.
Right. And, but clearly that must not have been done, or if it was done, it was never, ever maintained, because those trees look pretty sizable that I saw.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our feeling as well, is that it likely, when they ended up doing the lot grading, they probably just didn't end up building it.
Yeah.
And you can see it's between two phases of subdivision. So it might have been that the first phase said the second phase would build it, and then the second phase didn't show it and didn't build it. Mr. McQueenie's highlighting there, I think, the swale drain easement.
Thank you, Mr. McQueen. How wide is that easement, Mr. McQueen? Oh, Mr. Fountain.
It's 20 feet.
20,
It's 10 feet on either side of the property line.
Right, 10 feet on each side of the property line.
10 feet, I'm sorry.
Okay. So, Mr. Fountain, the big expense is moving the trees, or actually generally nurturing the swale?
So the way it's built, Mr. Chairman, it's why I think it probably wasn't cleared originally, is the area that's in the swale is actually kind of the highest land back there. And then there's a series of relatively large trees in it. So you have to clear the trees, remove the root structure, and then dig the ditch in where the high land of the trees used to be. So certainly I'd expect to get some comments from some of the neighbors on all that tree removal between the property line, and then you'd have to go in and dig that work out. But whenever you're dropping trees in the vicinity of residential structures, you tend to pay a reasonably high amount of money, because there's a lot of risk and liability for the tree companies.
Right.
There's quite a handful of trees. We did install, though, a similar system. We installed an underdrain system on Danoon, which is just like one street north of here, in an area that didn't have trees, where there was a series of about 10 different properties that were flooding. And just for perspective, that went in 2 years ago. That was about $65,000 just for the underdrain system through those rear yards.
And how many feet was it? If you ballparked it?
I'd have to check. It's probably on the order of somewhere between 500 and 1,000 feet.
And the length of this one is how long?
Depends how far you take it. If you kept it in the easement all the way down, you're probably still looking at 500 feet, something like that.
Oh, yeah. All right. So what's going to be the action step coming out of this one? I mean, Mr. Mayor?
Remind me, Mr. Hassel, is what would be the benefit of us abandoning the easement? Is that something you would still be interested in?
If y'all permanently abandon the easement for stormwater, I still got the utility. I will go to the corners of my lot, take a track hoe, and dig a 4-foot deep trench, put in a metal sheet pile system, backfill it with dirt so my neighbor's water stays in his yard, and then I will put in my own, grade my yard, and put in a sump pump, a little well point, and pipe the water underground out to the street.
And when it comes out to the street, where does it go?
It goes right down to the end of the street. I don't know where it heads back toward that ditch down at the end of the cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
That's where it's going now when I pump it with my hose.
All right, Mr. Fountain, you heard that. From an engineering standpoint, it's the first time, I don't know whether you heard that or not, but what's your feelings initially hearing that? I know we're gonna have time to go back and work through this outside this meeting, but what do you think about that, Mr. Fountain?
Sure. So technically a permanent tie-in to a right-of-way, Mr. O'Brien's online, you might be able to speak to that as probably a right-of-way permit for the tie. I think we've generally not aggressively enforced that aspect, especially for temporary systems, as Mr. Hassel has now, of saying that, it's a good way to get your water out and we're not going to make an issue of it. From a abandonment perspective, Mr. Hassel is sort of the topmost lot on the drainage. There is technically one more lot to the north. That's where we did speak with sort of the surrounding property owners to try to see if anyone had any strong feelings saying, no, we need the ability to drain our water through. Generally, the adjacent property owners sort of, again, were relatively ambivalent on whether it stays or goes. So from a departmental perspective, I mean, generally it's always good to have easements in case the city ever does want to build that project and add the drainage system in there, but it's certainly an option for council to consider to say that, we don't intend to build a system. There isn't any public water going through that area at this point. So there's not an obligation on us to maintain that easement or to keep an easement, not to for the maintenance side. So there is certainly that possibility that you could choose to abandon it. Just realize if we do abandon it, it's very hard to go back and get it to do a project later if we change our minds. That's the upside and downside of it.
And the only way I'll spend my money to fix it is if you do abandonment. But I consider it has been abandoned. I'm getting ready to FOIA your maintenance logs on that easement going back 20 years.
Yeah. So Mr. McQueen, you've been sitting back in a cerebral way listening to all of this. Do you have any input?
Well, yeah, I can look at, I don't have the declaration for Shadow Moss. I've got too many developments in my head right now. My biggest concern with abandoning it would probably, this doesn't serve city roads. So usually the city, if it were nowadays, the city would consider this a private drainage easement. The lots, the easement ties into the city system, which is that 30-foot easement, but it doesn't move water from the roadways, which is why we acquire easements over subdivisions. I don't know how it was back then, but my concern, abandoning it from our standpoint would mean abandoning any public interest in it. The problem is there's probably, if there's a 20-foot easement back there with utilities in it, there's probably something in the declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions for Shadow Moss that gives everybody cross easements over each other's property. In other words, those drainage easements are both private in that they serve the development and the lots in the development, and public in that they are dedicated to the city. And once they accepted, the city agrees to maintain them, and it's part of the city stormwater system. So I don't know how, it would be subject to the fact that your adjacent owners could likely complain if you do something to stop water from entering onto your or through your property, or if you cause flooding on your neighbor's property, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Under the declaration, there may be an issue, regardless of whether it's city maintained. There's a private interest as well as a public interest.
So, what would you recommend? I mean, from a legal, what do you need to look into to come back with a little bit more?
Well, I'm kind of with Matt. It's really a money. I've sat through a lot of these, and I mean, Matt and I can't require people to spend money.
Yeah, that's
and I understand the situation, but it's sort of, if it's me, I don't have to worry about budgeting as much as you all do, but it's just something where I'm like, just give me the money to do it and I'll do it. But I mean, it's really a city council call on whether or not to spend the money to address this issue versus any other stormwater issues in these circumstances. And I think that's where, we can always give you a solution forward. It's just whether or not we have the money to implement that solution. And I think Matt's sort of given the solution. It's just, we could abandon it. I don't know about Matt. I don't have a problem abandoning it because it gets us, then there's no question of our, liability or anything with respect to that. But I don't know, it creates private property disputes between the joint owners potentially. That's probably why the shed thing was brought up, is it's sort of, if there's private rights, we don't necessarily control the private rights between the parties. There's certain drainage easements that we don't control. So that, those would be my concerns, but it sounds, disturbing what Matt's saying. It's a matter of money, of allocating money towards a project to fix this.
Well, let me ask one of my last questions. Mr. Fountain, thank you, Mr. Mr. Fountain, if Mr. Hassel could do that, his suggestion of putting down the whatever he just explained, the metal thing there, if he gave us the permission to do it via easement, how come can we do that?
So it's a good question, and this is one that Mr. McQueen may want to weigh in on too, depending. Though I put him on the spot since I haven't prepped him on this one. Typically, when the city installs public infrastructure, it's serving a public good or a community good. It's not for the benefit of a single property owner. So it's a little bit trickier to say we would install like a pumping system in someone's backyard. Again, potentially spending tens of thousands of dollars to basically relieve flooding in a single person's backyard. It gets a little bit tricky that the drainages, as Chip said, or Mr. McQueenie said, are normally there for draining public water, especially if it's coming off of a roadway. That's how we generally treat easements. And certainly some of the other council members have a lot of experience in me saying similar things, that it's tricky when we get into rear yard systems where basically we're not saying that someone doesn't have a problem. We're saying, is there a governmental role in solving that problem?
Okay.
Yeah,
So it may,
that's
constructing
always
the
the question.
easement provides a benefit to all the homeowners that back up on the easement. There's a community benefit. Doing a single project in a single person's backyard is where you start to get. So it's the same reason we don't like resurface people's driveways for them, or there's lots of things that are private property benefits, but not necessarily public obligation benefits.
Yeah, but in this case, though, we had an easement on the back that's not functional. And the reason it's not functional, again, it comes right back to the money being appropriated. I'm just thinking if there's a more cost-effective way to solve the problem. Apparently, the homeowners have done that. A couple of them already have figured out, with their own weekend warrior solutions to figure out how to get the water out. And this man here obviously is left with the bigger problem.
And I'm certainly
be a way we can assist with that. That's all.
Yeah, I'm certainly not saying anything against Mr. Hassel in this situation, but Mr. Hassel could turn around and sell the house to another property owner who could say, this pump system you've installed isn't doing nearly enough to drain my property out. Therefore, I need you to install a bigger system or do something else. And we've certainly seen that the few times that over the last few decades, the city's tried to do something similar. There's also the concern, and I certainly don't want to put words in Mr. Hassel's mouth either, but the blocking of water on someone else's property from entering the easement would certainly be something that generally we wouldn't want to take on, because then if you do cause flooding on that home, you've also damaged someone's property, that is a public responsibility if you cause additional damage from new work you're doing frequently. Again, trying to talk kind of around the edges here, but I think you understand.
But actually, you brought up a good point. I mean, so now hypothetically, we go and improve that easement. It's actually going to benefit more than one. It may benefit as many as 3 homeowners. The lady who now has a French drain that she has to go out and clean out the drop boxes every time, or her version of a drop box every time it rains. And obviously her drainage is running through still yet another neighbor's yard. If that easement were improved, would it benefit all 3 properties?
So it's a good question on how we say benefit, right? I think, yes, you could say from a stormwater perspective, there's a benefit. I think that the neighbor has expressed that she doesn't feel she has a stormwater problem. And I suspect she probably would be opposed to us cutting down the trees in her backyard. So she may be displeased with that approach.
No. I'm talking about in the drainage easement that the city already has.
Sure. I agree. That's exactly where I'm speaking about.
Okay. I'm sorry.
And again, from a drainage perspective, we could probably say, yes, there is a improvement to the easement. It's in an easement. We have the right to do it. From a political standpoint, I'm not saying you wouldn't get just as much rage potentially from another property owner on a similar issue. And I think we've had a number of those, certainly with other similar rear yard drainage projects. And as Mr. McQueen mentioned, this is why generally the city doesn't accept new rear yard drainage easements, because it tends to get very difficult and very contentious very quickly. And Mr. Hassel has an absolute issue with water ponding in his backyard, so I'm not trying to diminish that in any way either. But there's never an answer that makes everyone happy in the neighborhood.
I get that, but beyond having a hearty discussion, I guess this issue just needs to be, Mr. Mayor, put on the agenda for up or down vote. I mean, either fix it this way or not. But just walking away, and apparently Mr. Hassel's been having conversations for won't put words in his mouth, but certainly for a decade on this one. Councilman Shahid, if you got a good idea, please bring it forward.
I was going to say what you were bringing up, Mr. Chairman, that why would this not fall into our small project allocation?
I agree with you.
That's all this is that we just got to put this on the list and see what this thing ends up on our small project allocation.
I agree.
I know it may be limited to his property, but still, I mean, this just probably have that money allocated. And
I agree with you 100%, Councilman. I'm gonna get the mayor. Mr. Mayor, I think it's a good suggestion, Councilman.
So just hearing everything that's been discussed here this afternoon on this, and I haven't walked it myself, which honestly I like to do in a case like this before we make a definitive commitment. But it seems to me that it would be best to maintain the easement and try to take it back to the original intent of 30 or 40 years ago and create drainage that serves those property owners. I hear Mr. Hassel's commitment to do, a project on its own if we abandon the easement, but, there isn't a property just to the other side of the easement that I guess theoretically public water could traverse. And then there's the lot right behind him that's got 10 feet or whatever. So I hate to shut anybody off. I think that we ought to try to make the thing work like it was originally intended. I think the fault of anyone might have go back to the original developer for not putting it in place like it was planned. And then the city didn't make sure it was put in place like it was planned. And then nothing ever got done to maintain it. So I fully acknowledge that, Mr. Hassel. But whether you can do that and keep some of the trees, or whether hopefully you could keep some of them and get some flow going along the easement, and maybe that's $100,000 figure that Matt is estimating that would take to make the easement functional. But we've got a big elephant in the city of fixing our drainage issues, and we've been taking it one bite at a time. And we took a lot of bites this year by taking care of those small projects. This is just another bite of solving the long-term drainage needs of our city for these property owners like Mr. Hassel. And I think we ought to add it to the small project list, get it priced out. And I hate to tell you, Mr. Hassel, we spent this year's allocation, but 2022 it will be here before we know it. And you've been at this a long time, so
if I have light at the end of the tunnel, I can live with that.
Right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, I think you're dead on with that, and I appreciate so much your comments. I tell you what, though, we want to set a time to go out there. We get a common time to go out there and kind of walk that area. I'd be willing to do it too. Cause I'm like you. Maybe we can do a meandering ditch as opposed to cutting down all the trees. But obviously, I have to defer to Mr. Fountain on that. So the action step is we're going to go out and take a look at it, and then simultaneously we're going to add it to the small project list.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and consideration.
Well, I think to put it on the small project list, I think that takes a motion. So
moved.
Probably moved by the mayor, a second by Councilman Griffith. Any more discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are we voting to approve? Are we voting to approve it or just put it on the list?
Put it on the list right now, and then we can go out and do a site visit.
So we'll get to discuss it in 2022.
Correct. In the
Okay.
meantime, though, we can do a site visit at some point in the future.
Gotcha.
And Mr. Fountain can come up with a.
Let me know when you come and I'll have the tea or the lemonade.
I heard that. All right, thank you, Mr. Hassel. You did a good job.
I think it's
Thank
before
you.
a beer, so not just lemonade and tea, but maybe a beer instead.
I'd be fine. I have that also, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more information coming for the committee today?
We adjourn.
Mr. Mr.
Yes.
Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to let you know in case we have any members or staff that were going to join recreation, the chair has requested that we reschedule that meeting. So if you're going to join recreation, you don't have to worry about that. We'll be rescheduling that before our April 27th council meeting.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cook. Listen, we went over time, but it was time well spent. Thank you all for your input on today's.
Mr. Brian, you be around for a while? I'm gonna give you a holler real quick.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Chip, we have that one item, the Country Club 2 item that's on the City Council Public Works report, which did not make it on this agenda. Chip, your discretion, whatever you want to do.
Well, yeah, there was supposed to be an executive session on this agenda that went on City Council's agenda. I've reached out to everybody that's involved with the discussion, and I think it's better to wait until next meeting to have the discussion. Especially it's got a lot of public, interest involved, and I just don't want anybody to be caught off guard. So we'll make sure we get it right next time.
Very good, sir.
McQueen, appreciate that. I have a question for Mr. Fountain, but Mr. Fountain, I can call you outside the meeting. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, good.
Mr. Griffin, I'll call you tomorrow about our item too.
All right, good deal. Listen, by acclamation, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.